complete their interviews in the comfort of their homes. In a matter of hours, dozens of candidates completed the video interview. Normally, I would have needed weeks to interview all these people. It's incredible. Using the Searchy platform, I can see every candidate ranked from top to bottom, with information about their personality profiles, cultural values, skills, experience, and all of this together with their video and CV included. Searchy focuses on human insights to predict the personality that best fits our company culture. Now I hire faster, with more accurate candidates, and at last, the business is getting the right people. Are you ready to give it a try? The recruitment process is difficult. Every week, hours and hours are spent scanning the wrong people. That's when I found Searchy. Using the Searchy platform, I can create the role I'm looking for, define the company culture, and the type of behaviors we need in a matter of minutes. Searchy uses AI and machine learning during video interviews and compiles in-depth, real-time results. Wherever they are in the world, candidates can now complete their interviews in the comfort of their homes. In a matter of hours, dozens of candidates completed the video interview. Normally, I would have needed weeks to interview all these people. It's incredible. Using the Searchy platform, I can see every candidate ranked from top to bottom, with information about their personality profiles, cultural values, skills, experience, and all of this together with their video and CV included. Searchy focuses on human insights to predict the personality that best fits our company culture. Now I hire faster, with more accurate candidates, and at last, the business is getting the right people. Are you ready to give it a try?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another LinkedIn Live session with Searchy. It's the first of the decade, not just the first of the year. We were unfortunate last week. We had a bit of a technical problem with LinkedIn. They had a global problem that was affecting people from posting, liking, sending messages, and we were unfortunately afflicted by it. So LinkedIn, if anyone is watching, sort me out, because I spent a bunch of money on trying to promote it. It wasn't a lot, but it was some. All right, look, I'm really excited today for a couple of reasons. Number one is because I like talking about this subject. Number two is we got some new experiments that we're going to be trying this year in the stream. One of them is like knowledge sharing, which is much more kind of organized with presentations and less of the kind of one-on-one kind of podcasty type session in that direction, where we're going to have one person explaining some of the concepts and some of the work that we're doing here. For me, I think that it's going to be much more valuable for everyone. And the reason that I think that is because when we're doing these kind of two-way kind of intersections, it's really great from a storytelling perspective. And it's really good to kind of understand some of the things that people have been through. But it's not very... It doesn't allow us to spend enough time on the topic. And maybe that's because the format doesn't lend itself to it, and maybe that's because we're still fairly young in terms of our journey in exploring that and the experiments that we've been running. So this year, we've got a bunch of stuff that we're going to be experimenting with. The first one that we're going to be experimenting with today is this knowledge share with kind of organized presentations and stuff. The subject today is data-driven recruitment. And the reason that we chose this subject is because towards the end of last year, we were invited to an event in Dubai called Step Next. And they asked us to deliver a presentation on data-driven recruitment. So we put the presentation together, we went out and we did the presentation. Yeah, we did the talk. And we got some really good positive feedback about some of the lessons that we were trying to teach around objectivity, around kind of how you kind of define a problem, how you re-explore a problem, how you run experiments, and some of the kind of broader conversations that you don't necessarily hear so much about around kind of, you know, how the growing global population should be leading to easier recruitment problems to solve, which is not, which is partially as a consequence of some of the new industry which is arriving on the scene, but also in part, a very large part, down to the recruitment practices that are being employed, not necessarily evolving with the times. So we talk a little bit about that, specifically really from kind of the opinion that kind of LinkedIn kind of broke recruitment a little bit, mainly because of the easy apply button. Right now there's very little currency that's involved in applying to a position. You don't have to be local, you don't have to spend hours doing anything. All you have to do is click that one button, which then leads to this huge oversupply, and recruiters can't physically deal with it. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the first kind of opening slide, which is just a bit of an introduction into what data-driven recruitment is. So really what we're going to be covering is how a computer and data can help to color our assumptions and inform hiring decisions. So by inform hiring decisions, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you only use it for good things. You can also use it for bad things. There's this concept in kind of the data community, which was really kind of born from Google, or they were at least some of the first people to really understand how to use it, called data surplus. And typically what we've seen and what most people do is they take the bit of data that they want and then they use that because that's the bit of information that they're interested in. And then everything else that kind of surrounds that gets thrown away, it gets discarded. It's kind of like waste data. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that there's more that you can do with data that proves your theory false than you can do with data that necessarily proves your theory correct. And the reason that we believe that is because the learning journey is arguably one of the most important skills that you can hone and you can practice and get really, really good at, right? Being able to learn very quickly is the only real way that we can resolve problems that we find and experience as they arise. If you can't learn well, then you can't respond well. So that's kind of where our position comes from, that kind of idea. So let's jump into the next slide, please, Fran. For those of you who are new this year, it's not just me in front of the camera. There's also Fran, our guy behind the camera, who helps to control everything, helps with all of the sound, all of the audio, all of the visual, and he's been instrumental in getting us set up. So, first thing that I really want to drill into you guys is I am not a recruiter. I'm not a recruiter. I am basically someone who's fairly good at understanding what a problem might look like, conceptualizing some ways that we can look into those problems, and then explaining them to people who are significantly better qualified than I am, to have them find a real kind of scalable solution to that. Really, I mean, if you had to designate me or identify me as something, I'm the co-founder at Searchy. And we are a machine learning company that uses video and AI and behavioral signal processing and behavioral informatics to be able to take a feed and understand the data that we're receiving from that feed. So the body language, the tone of voice, the facial expressions, the responses to questions, and then convert that into some kind of pattern that we can recognize and identify to understand personality traits, organizational skills, cultural values, and similar things. And by doing this over the last few years, we've been recognized by the World Economic Forum as one of the, I forget what it was, something about reinventing the fourth industrial revolution in the Middle East and North Africa. We partner with Microsoft as well, we build all of our kind of technology on the Microsoft Azure cloud stack. So they've been really, really instrumental in helping us to grow as well. And all of that stuff together kind of gives me a lens through which I look at the recruitment problem, which is a little bit different to how a recruiter might look at it. My thing is more about, and I say this very hesitantly, if there are any recruiters or recruitment consultants who are watching, I don't intend for this to come out incorrectly, but unfortunately my vocabulary often deserts me in my hour of need. So what the lens that I look through is is one of kind of identifying quality of candidate across a broad spectrum. So I'm not just looking at skills and experience and trying to then push a candidate into a thing or get a candidate interviewed, because our business model doesn't work like that. It's less about putting candidates into a role, and it's more about understanding which of them really fit into that role, so as that a hiring manager can make those decisions for themselves, right? We're trying to help hiring managers to prioritize their time. And as a consequence, it means that we're looking at different signals. It's not to suggest that one is better than the other, but the time that I spend is really in understanding a kind of broader level and a kind of data level what the person and personality is like. So let's hop into the next slide, please, Fran. The next slide is, this is a really important part of us framing the conversation, right? So we hear a lot about, and there's all of these sound bites about data is the new oil, and abundance. You know, Peter Diamandis, who I think is really an interesting character and done some fantastic things for innovation and space travel and stuff, to name a few. He has this book about abundance called, I think, Abundance. But really, what I understand when people say this from a recruitment perspective is, if there's more data than there ever has been, and we spend more time at work than we do pretty much anywhere else in our life, it poses the question to me of, if this is the truth and there is more data and we spend all of this time at work, why are we so bad at talent acquisition? And that's really something that we're going to be exploring in the next 40 minutes or so. If, by the way, anyone has any questions or you want to shout out to us, please feel free to leave some comments. We'll try and address your questions as they go. I know I've been posting some slides from this presentation on LinkedIn over the last few days, right? And there were a few people who had some opinions about specifically the concept of talent being normally distributed and success being something else. I kind of referenced it as being linear, but really what I'm talking about is it being more of success being more of a question of luck and than it is kind of talent or skill. So we'll get into that in a bit. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to share them with us. So yeah, if this is true and data is more abundant than it's ever been and we're spending all of this time at work, then why on earth are we so bad at talent acquisition? So let's jump into the next one, please, Fran. All right, so let's frame this a little bit. The internet has made us incredibly good at being able to connect and communicate with people. In the last 15 years, since kind of Statista has statistics for us to review, the internet penetration has grown to 4.1 billion people. So if there are 4.1 billion people that we can advertise our jobs to, why are we finding that it's so very difficult for us to capture the people that we want? Part of this has probably got something to do with a marketing component, so how are you messaging to them? But really the problem to me doesn't seem to be in the marketing as much as it seems to be in the screening and the shortlisting and the prioritizing of your time. If you're a recruiter that's receiving 1,500 people apply to your LinkedIn job post in the first 20 minutes of it going live, I exaggerate, in the first 24 hours of it going live, I'm sorry LinkedIn, you're not 20 minutes fast. But if you're a recruiter that's receiving 1,500 people apply to your job posting within 24 hours, how are you prioritizing those people? How are you supposed to be able to say, okay, that's my guy, that's my girl, that's my girl, that's my guy? It's very difficult for you to be able to respond quickly enough. So effectively it becomes a product of who came in first. I think another really important thing to consider is that the global working population is getting older, right? The working age population is getting older, so there are more people and they're working for longer, so the global working age population is increasing. We're currently hovering around 65% of the global population being of working age, right? So this is the thing, we've got all of these people, and they're all on the internet, half of the global population, right? There's like 7.8 billion people or something on the planet, and 4 billion of them are using the internet. So we've got all of these people, they're all working for longer, more of them are working age. So what's the problem? Why are we struggling so hard with this recruitment problem? Let's jump. Fundamentally, like I said already, I think that this comes down to the internet. The internet was fantastic at allowing us this reach, but as screening and shortlisting and prioritizing methods have not evolved very much. In the last, 50, 60 years or something, psychometrics has become a part of some of the more advanced recruitment processes, but fundamentally it's fairly expensive. It requires quite a lot of understanding at a kind of research level, psychology level, which creates a kind of barrier, a bottleneck to being able to access it, right? It becomes that little bit less accessible. So if there are more people who are accessing your communications, but you can't get through to them, that is a consequence, to my mind, of the democratization of information, which is the internet, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, it has kind of caused this kind of the internet has kind of caused this talent acquisition problem because of an oversupply of candidates. And I don't know, if you look at it from a kind of historical context, if you wanted to apply for a job 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, you had to be physically present, right? You had to be able to go in or mail your CV to the person or group of people that were looking for the job. You have to physically send something in there. So the transaction is that much more costly because it takes time, it takes money. You know, there are basically, to my mind, three types of currency: US dollars, time in minutes, seconds, and hours, and headache, right? So if we've reduced the cost on those three things to just quickly clicking on a button, then it's no surprise that we're being swamped by all of this supply. So when I talk about the internet kind of breaking talent acquisition, that's really what I mean. It's given us access to more and more people, which is fantastic, but our ability to screen through those people hasn't improved. It hasn't evolved in a meaningful and scalable way like something like LinkedIn has. So let's jump into the next one. This whole next section is really on how we are looking at the sorting and selection problem from a problem perspective, not from a solution perspective. I'm going to kind of touch on that a little bit, but I don't like these sessions to be very salesy. So I will touch a little bit on some of the solution as we're exploring it, but I really want to begin the whole kind of season of 2020 with addressing what does the problem look like. So let's jump in. The first thing that I want to talk about is Rick and Morty. So look, I appreciate that not everyone is going to be into the whole kind of chart thing. So for those of you who find charts to be boring and find data to be boring, I have littered the presentation with cartoons and other images, right? So this one this is an interesting idea, right? So the general feeling is that talent is normally distributed. So what we mean by that is it follows this red, there you go, this red curve. So that's great, and it kind of makes sense a little bit if you think about it. There are people who are extremely talented on this far side, and there are people who are less talented, and then there's the kind of mean and the standard in the middle, which is a larger representation of the population, right? There's more people in that pool. But what strikes me as being weird, and this is kind of two graphs that I've put into one. What strikes me as being weird is is success. And when I'm defining success here, what I'm really talking about is the kind of distribution of wealth, or wealth and capital as a proxy for success seeing as that's kind of how it's measured most of the time. When you hear people talk about who are the most successful people in the world, they talk about, people like Bill Gates, and they talk about Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of these really, 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 really wealthy people. Forgive me for dwelling on the tech players. It's a force of habit, I suppose. So if you think about success from a kind of capital distribution perspective, you've got a lot of people who are very poor, like 80% of the population owns like less than 1% of the wealth. And then when you look at the top 1%, they own like 80% of the wealth or whatever it is, something crazy. So when I look at this and when I think about this, what it says to me, what it speaks to me is that if talent is normally distributed, so following this Gaussian distribution, and if success is like a Pareto curve or a power function, which is this kind of curvy line that starts high and ends up low, then surely that has got something to do with how we're recruiting people, right? Surely you'd expect if our talent acquisition process was more meritocratic, which we're going to talk about another time in the future, but if our talent acquisition process was more meritocratic, then you'd expect the distribution of wealth to follow a similar pattern to talent, maybe. So when we were looking at what is the problem that we were really trying to address, this is kind of it in a graph. How do we help people who are who kind of merit? And meritocracy is a funny thing, but how do we help the people who are better talented to earn more money? So that they can then concentrate on some of the things which are arguably more important, like self-actualization. So rather than having this kind of problem with self-esteem, if you look at kind of Maslow's hierarchy, to my mind it feels like there's a lot of people who are stuck in the self-esteem sector. And how can we help to move people into the self-actualization layer of Maslow's hierarchy? And for me that feels like finding work that pays well, finding work that stimulates you, and finding work that you really enjoy. So let's jump into the next one, please, Fran. So that's kind of an overview of the problem as we see it. The next step is really in kind of understanding what a data-driven strategy will do for your recruitment process and for your business. So the first thing is pretty obvious, right? It will give you access to a huge volume of data, right? It will give you more data to collect. And if you remember when I was talking a minute ago about Google and their attitude towards data surplus, the more data you have, the more stuff that you can do with it, right? So a lot of people, Google won at search because of their relevance, and their relevance was really not delivered by matching keywords to ads. It was really delivered by understanding your behavior from the ads you don't click on, from the links that you don't click on, right? And then trying to understand and predict which direction you're going to move in. So you'd be surprised once you start gathering this data, you'd be surprised what you could do with it. The second thing is that when you've started building this data and gathering this data and acquiring this data, you'll find that it becomes much easier to produce evidence for your hiring decisions. So when you're trying to, as a recruiter, when you go to your line manager, you don't have to start off the conversation with, I think this person will be good. Right? You can point to certain things and say, okay, look, based on this thing and this thing and this thing, I think we've got a match here. And there's some kind of data-driven decision-making which may have been lacking in that kind of selection process. And then the third thing is a little bit longer to materialize. It doesn't happen at the beginning because you still need to put in all of the infrastructure to be able to catch the data. So it doesn't happen early, but it happens in the long run. It will drive you cost savings. It will reduce the amount that you waste in your recruitment process. So there are a few ways that will do it. Number one is if you're really, really, really good at it, you'll have fewer people that leave in the first year. So I was reading a piece of literature earlier today about first-year attrition rates, and it turns out that in the UK, roughly 20% of the people that left an organization left within their first 12 months, right? So if your first year attrition rate is so high, surely finding people who are better suited to your organization beyond having experience in the task or in the function that you want them to have experience in, surely finding people who are going to stay is going to be one of the first ways that you can start to reduce some of your costs that you're incurring, right? Some of the other ways that you might be able to reduce some of those cost savings, by the way, sorry if I'm a little bit loud, but some of the other ways that you might incur some cost savings are recycling existing candidates. So once you work out what it is that you're measuring, you can also then use some of that data to be able to work out how to surface candidates that you think are of higher value for a different role. You're going to reduce the amount of time that you spend in the long run on screening people, because you'll be able to identify patterns that allow you to save time there. And there are many, many more. And one of my favorites that we're doing is personalizing rejection emails to candidates, right? I think that this is something that's just not discussed enough in the talent acquisition industry. But when we talk about candidate experience, it's normally on the positive side, where it's kind of like, oh, I found this candidate and I took them to this interview and then we saw them really quickly and we hired them very fast, right? That's great. But what about the 9,000 other people that applied for the position, or even the 60 other people that applied for the position? Where's the consideration for them? Obviously, if there's one role that's open, only one person is going to get it, and everyone that's looking for a job understands that. But recruiters are terrible on the whole, and I'm sorry if I paint you with this brush as well and you're not doing this, but on the whole, recruiters are fairly poor at giving feedback or even rejecting them. Do you know what? I was with a client, what was it? It was Thursday last week, right? I was with a client and he was telling me a story about a game that he went to. So in year one, he'd applied for this role with this company. He didn't hear anything back, right? And in year one, he went to go and watch a game in like a VIP box. And it turned out that the recruiter who had interviewed him for that role was in the box with him, right? And so he just, like, on the side, as the conversation was flowing, asked if there was any feedback. Lady said no feedback. This started becoming an annual thing. So in the second year, he ended up going back to the same box and the same group of people there, and the recruiter was there as well. And as a joke, he asked, do you have any feedback for me? This is a whole year later, right? A whole year later. He still hasn't received any feedback. He bumps into her at this event thing and asks, do you have any feedback for me? Lady says no. And by this point, she's starting to sort of like get a little bit fed up with his asking, right? Third year, goes back again, sees her again, still not received any feedback, and asks, this is becoming a bit of a running joke now, but do you have any feedback for me? I guess the job isn't mine. She was not very impressed with him, and she may have sworn at the guy afterwards and told him in no uncertain words that she didn't want to continue playing that game with him, right? And it was funny. Obviously, I can't fully deliver the message because we're live on LinkedIn, and I probably shouldn't use any expletives. But it was funny because he was using it as an example of something that he wanted to avoid in his organization. So for me, one of the really exciting things that we're doing is providing personalized feedback to candidates who have been rejected. So from the video interviews that candidates do with us, we can predict certain things about their strengths and weaknesses. So we can drill into some of the strengths that we identified in these videos and then customize the rejection email so that the candidate has something useful rather than nothing and being completely ghosted. So let's jump into the next one. That's valuable from an employer branding perspective. Hey, that's about it. Right. In order to create, in order to get yourself to a data-driven position where you are genuinely leaning into the data and using it effectively, there are a few things you need to consider. The first is, what is your objective? Winning doesn't mean winning in the same way to everyone, right? Just like hiring the right person, right is fairly subjective. So before you begin, let's start thinking about what is your objective. Before you begin with the kind of feature extraction from the data that you've gathered, start with what is your objective. What is the thing that you're really looking for? Is it that you need someone with X years experience? Or is it that you need someone that's going to be really strong on good organizational citizenship behavior? Or do you specifically need to avoid some kind of counterproductive workplace behavior? Or do you need someone within a budget? Or do you need someone for some kind of quota? You know, is it part of your Emiratization drive? Is it part of, you know, your internship program? So start by defining what is your objective, and it should not necessarily be the same for every role. It should be kind of bespoke and understood that each role is different with different requirements. And then it goes into kind of what are you measuring? So what are you measuring to achieve your objective? So you could be measuring, for example, and I'm going to come to this in a little bit, but you could be measuring, for example, past work experience. And you could be using that to screen candidates because you think that the number, and we're going to come into that in a little bit, and I'll share the citation for you so that you can go and have a look for that research paper yourself. I strongly recommend it because it's a real eye-opener. To think that someone with 15 years of experience at company A might not necessarily work out very well at company B sounds on the surface a little bit counterintuitive. But I know a dude at the moment who is a very, very senior C-level member of a bank in KSA. And he has a track record, man, a real heavy-hitting track record in that role. And he's struggling because it's not the same. So there's a lot of stuff that you learn in a previous environment which doesn't necessarily translate very well to a new environment. So perhaps we need to reduce, and this is it when I say what are you measuring to achieve your objective, perhaps you need to reduce the dependency or the weight that you're putting on the signal that you thought was predictive but actually isn't. And the only way for you to know whether or not that is predictive for your organization is to frequently review your data and frequently review what your measuring criteria is and how you're weighting that different data to produce or predict the outcome that you're looking for. So let's move into the next one. I think this is really important as well. So beware your bias. We all have a bias problem, and we've fallen prey to it several times. The learnings that we've taken from it are fairly valuable, incredibly valuable, in fact. At the end of the day, bias creeps into all things, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not kind of overtly prejudiced or racist, right? So, for example, we've had various situations where we've been reviewing our data, believing it to be kind of very representative of the global population, and it turns out that we were looking at through a lens that didn't really consider all of the different variables which kind of contribute towards bias. So we go through a lot of different processes to try and audit the data that we are feeding into our machine. But this isn't about us, right? This is really about your bias leaking into your decision-making process and your hiring process. So just because you recognize some behavior in someone that you've seen in an existing team member that you think to be a high performer doesn't necessarily mean that trait that you're identifying is going to convert well into this person in your environment. So try to reduce your subjectivity when you are in these kind of hiring interviews, right? If you can reduce your subjectivity and hang on to your objectivity as much as possible, then you're going to find that number one, you extract better data, and number two, your decisions become far less kind of painted by the lens through which you see the person you're interviewing. So let's jump into the next one. Sticking with the Rick and Morty motif, some of the key considerations as you're going through this kind of journey, like I'm trying to lay out a bit of a journey, I suppose. Number one, start with kind of defining the objective. Number two, to identify ways that you can reduce your bias. It's constantly leaking into our decision-making process, and there's nothing really wrong with that at the end of the day, I guess, as long as I said, it's not overtly prejudiced against a minority group or something, which, I don't know, I mean, looking at some of the data that Facebook makes available, they got 24% of their technical team of female or something like that, so maybe there might be some leak happening there, I don't know. We'll come into that in another session, another time though. But that does kind of lead into the next thing, right, which is consider the team. The work doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? You can't just hire someone because you think that they have, and this kind of follows on from the point I made earlier, right? You can't just hire someone because they have the skills and the experience on paper, or they have that history of working on on that problem. Because work doesn't happen in a vacuum. Work happens in a team. So you have to consider other metrics, other things which are going to impact how that team responds to the new individual being injected into their kind of working world. And that often comes with a compromise. And that compromise looks like embracing idiosyncrasy. Not everyone has to be like you. You're not perfect. And it's kind of very difficult sometimes for us to admit that to ourselves. Certainly, what I find in our team is there are a handful of kind of personalities which are fairly difficult to embrace. But when you look at how they're contributing to the dynamic of the team, you can see the value that they're adding into that team. They might not be the easiest people for us to interact with all of the time, but they provide value to the team, whether that's from a creative angle, whether that's from a task completion angle, whether it's from a competition angle. There are lots of different ways that people contribute to the output of your team. So try to find ways of looking past that kind of that similarity that you're looking for, those patterns you're looking for, and really get comfortable with embracing idiosyncrasy. Let's go. So some of the stuff that we measure in the industry, but maybe we don't need to. Let's jump into the next one, Fran. Let's quickly skim through this. We've had this habit historically, and even today, which is evaporating a little bit, of using old things to work today, right? So old management styles. So there's two which really stand out, right? There's Taylorism and there's Fordism. And they both kind of contribute very significantly to the way that we run our companies today. Taylorism was kind of the birth of this thing. It was called the scientific management theory, and it's basically the idea that as machining became a thing, there were so many individuals who were producing goods in their own way, right? They were. I think we'd refer to them now as artisan. But that was the way. There was no kind of standardized production method. So Taylorism kind of started off by saying, like, stop doing it your way, start doing it my way. And then Fordism took it a little bit further and really came up with the concept of the mass assembly line, which has been phenomenal for for industry generally, right? That's been one of the transformative innovations of the last 100 years, definitely. So congratulations on that. But what we're finding is that it's not translating well into the new kind of industrial revolution that we're on the cusp of, arguably, at the moment. And I think that's because the deal then was really, if you do things the way that I ask you to do them or the way that I tell you to do them, you will then get a paycheck. Right? You sacrifice your individuality, do things my way, and you will get a regular paycheck. And it worked very well. Now we're finding that whether it's a combination of some of the kind of shifts in the fabric of society that are consequences of the internet and how we communicate, or something else like the complexity of the work, we're finding that these mechanisms, these management mechanisms, are less effective as they have been historically. And the kind of software industry has been pretty good at coming up with ideas around new management methods. So we've got Scrum and Agile, which we really lean into over here, but that's probably because we're a software company. So that's an important consideration, really, to my mind, because it helps to define the things that we were looking at or we have been looking at in order to make our predictions, right? These are the kind of things we were measuring to make our predictions. Next, please, Fran. All right, so some of the KPIs that recruiters get to work towards, right? So we're looking at time to hire. We're looking at things like where did the candidate come from or candidates come from? How much did it cost us to find this person, bring them on? How successful were we on pass-throughs? So candidate application through to first interview, through to second interview, through to offer or technical or whatever it is. The total number of applicants that we generated, and then the conversion rate, so the people that we are finally making an offer to. And these metrics, to my mind, they just don't inspire an awful lot of requirement for innovation from a recruitment agency perspective as much as internally as well. But they tend to measure kind of outcomes, kind of like finite things that happen as a consequence of other activity. So it allows you, if you're measuring these things, it allows you to circle back and say, okay, well, my conversion rate was really low or my cost to hire was really high. So it allows you to identify that, but it doesn't really give you much of a framework for working out how you can improve that or optimize your activity to move away from that high cost to hire or to increase your conversion rate. Let's jump in. So with that in mind, some of the things that I think might be less effective and kind of a consequence of those earlier metrics, some of the things that I think that might be a little bit outdated as predictors for how well someone's going to fit into a role are things like education. So where were you educated in the subject that you took? There's very few people who are still kind of vocationally practicing the thing that they studied at school. It's becoming increasingly less common. And there's this kind of lean in to where you went to school. Not to pick too much on Facebook, but I have been looking at them in a fair amount of detail recently, mainly because they make a lot of information public, right? So it's not necessarily that Facebook are particularly bad at diversity and inclusion. It's actually not that at all. Facebook are one of the very few large companies in that area, or in any area really, that make that D&I information, that diversity and inclusion information publicly available. And we're going to talk about it in the next stream. But it does mean that I've been able to examine it in some detail, especially when I'm using things like LinkedIn Talent Insights that allow me to get that little bit deeper in. And do you know what I found when I was looking at Facebook? I found that in the last 12 months, over 13% of the people that they recruited came from 10 schools. 13% of the people that Facebook recruited in the last 12 months came from just 10 schools, 10 universities, that are unsurprisingly all in the States, right? You got Carnegie Mellon in there. You got, God, what were some of the other ones? I don't know. We'll come on to it next week anyway. But to my point, the education history and the place of education isn't necessarily an effective predictor of how well someone is going to work in your workplace in the future. Number of jobs they've had, so that's historically been considered as kind of a bad thing, right? If they job hop quite a lot, but then that could also mean that they're quite good at engaging in a team and completing tasks very quickly. Maybe they were hired to execute a specific project and they managed to clean it very quickly and get it executed and productized very fast. Years of experience has historically been considered as a good predictor of future workplace performance. It's not. Work history, so again, the places that you worked, right? So the places that you work don't necessarily make you better or worse. That's not entirely without, it's not to say it's not entirely valuable to understand where someone's been working, but we often place a lot more emphasis on that than is necessarily fair. Seniority, being senior at something doesn't make you good at something. And then my favorite, the gut feel. I feel like this person's going to be great. And this is often down to our innate ability to recognize patterns, but not necessarily have the capacity to oralize them or externalize the pattern that you recognized. Let's jump. So what are some of the things that we could be measuring? Some of the things that we could be measuring are not necessarily if someone completed the task that they were set, but how did they behave when they were confronting that task? Something that I think that's very, very interesting is this kind of situational judgment test as a concept. As a fairly effective way of understanding how someone might behave when they're in a specific situation or task that's set for them. Frequency of similar complex tasks. So task similarity is important for transfer learning, but it's not the only thing. Things like interpersonal behavioral traits. So understanding how the personality of someone is going to integrate and play with your existing team to produce different kinds of outputs, right? So you might have a team that's all very, very similar personality-wise, and that makes them like a little bit cliquey. And then if you introduce someone that's not the same and values different things or behaves in a different way or is less outspoken, then that can really shift the dynamic, or it can polarize that person against this other team or this other group in the team. Problem solving, cognitive problem solving skills are a really key predictor of how effective someone might be in the workplace. And then understanding, what does counterproductive workplace behavior look like? So if you can recognize the kinds of behaviors that will not work well in your organization, and someone here who is on paper truly excellent for your role, but then they exhibit all of this behavior which is counterproductive to your team and to your workplace, does that make them a good hire? Don't know. Are you going to understand that from the CV? Absolutely not. So maybe we want to start looking at things outside of the CV. So let's jump forwards. I haven't got any visibility on questions, Fran.
Ask if anyone wants.
Ah, cool, yeah. If anyone's got anything they want to contribute, let me know. Happy to field some of your questions. Otherwise, drop me a direct message, as has happened in the past, and I'll be happy to get back to you, arrange a call and have a chat. So look, this slide is, I think, one of my favorites, and it really does demonstrate the relationship between total experience or past experience and its ability or inability to predict future workplace performance. So there's this piece of research, it's a meta-analysis of tens of thousands of different data points across something like 72 different pieces of research, 72 after they cleaned it as well. And what they discovered when they produced this meta-analysis was that total historical work experience isn't necessarily a good predictor of future workplace performance. And what they found was that in low-level, kind of low-skill requirement roles, it can be a bit of a predictor, right? So for things like careering, it could be a good predictor of whether someone's going to work well in that environment, right? But then for kind of mid-range stuff, so that's the stuff that the majority of us are doing, especially if you're here on LinkedIn watching me right now, the majority of us are in this kind of mid-range of complexity. Historical experience is not a good predictor for future workplace performance. And then as you go kind of up to the real high end of complexity, then again it becomes an okay predictor. So really some jobs may benefit a little from previous experience, but the majority of them don't. So if that's the case, why are we using the CV the way that we're using it? Why are we so desperate for it? Oh, what's up? Thanks, man. Hi, Himesh. What other data sources do you use to predict behavioral aspects of a candidate? Cool, I'm going to give you an answer to that. Do you want me to keep this or not? Nah, it's cool, you keep it. Look, I'm going to come to that any second. Let's jump to the next slide, because it might even be that. So for us, let me come back to you, Himesh, because yeah, we're using a few different things to look into that. But some of the things, before I get into that, some of the things that I'd like you guys to think about is how people use language, right? So language, to my mind, is it's not just the way that we communicate, it's also the way that we comprehend. So the way that you use your language doesn't just work when I'm speaking at the camera or when you're engaging with me or with other people that are around you. We also use it internally to rationalize and to comprehend the things that we are experiencing, learning, testing, trying. It's one of the ways that our brain understands information. It helps us to process information. So what people say is as important or can be as important as how they say it or why they say it. And our capacity to think, therefore, is linked to our ability to use language. The more robust our language, the more we can understand the things that we see. It's no longer just a white car. It could also be, and there could be any number of other ways of describing that experience that you're looking at, right? And then our ability to externalize our thoughts can be a predictor of our scope of cognition, right? So the deeper I can describe something and share that experience with you suggests the deeper I understand it. So in summary to that piece, like listen not just to what the answer was, but how the questions are answered. Because how the questions are answered can tell us as much as what the answer was. Okay, so Himesh, to your point, how are we using, or what are we doing over here, which is kind of outside of the remit of the CV? Sorry?
Do you want to read it again?
No, it's cool, I got it, man. I think I kind of broadly remember. Okay, so we're using, or we might suggest, that you use some other considerations outside of the CV, which are kind of structured around behavioral interview techniques. So rather than asking somebody, I don't know, rather than asking someone, give me an example of a time when you had to use design thinking to solve a user experience problem, don't ask that question. Rather than asking that question, perhaps you want to look at asking a question which runs in a very similar, in a similar kind of way, but is asking a different question. Perhaps you want to ask, when you were confronted with a design thinking problem around a specific kind of customer journey or customer experience that you found difficult to solve, how did you behave and how did you respond to that problem? Because the thing isn't, the thing that you're trying to predict is, how is this person going to integrate into my team, right? Not, can they understand or do they know how to do design thinking? That's less important than how do they, or that's less important than do they understand how to take design thinking principles and integrate them into the team that I have available. So we like to look a lot at the kind of behavioral interviewing style. And some of the things that we're looking for are things like prosodic structure. So that's the kind of flavor of or the way that the sentence is structured. The foundational frequency. So this is your kind of pitch and your amplitude in your tone of voice. Entropy. So the entropy of energy, which is like the transition of energy and how the voice changes and how the energy of the behavioral gestures changes. Amplitude, so volume, you know, when I speak loudly, it's suggesting something about my openness, it's suggesting something about my extroversion, it's suggesting something about my agreeableness. Facial expressions, they also, they're obviously an emotional signal of how our brain is processing a thing. So you can, once you start to really focus in and pay some attention on some of those behavioral signals, it allows you to begin understanding a little bit about how this person responds in a situation. What are the kind of things that this person values? Because at the end of the day, what are emotions if they're not a way of our conscious brains predicting or identifying what's important to us, right? I imagine, or I think I believe, based on what I know at the moment, that emotions are the way that we prioritize things or assign value to things. So when I have a positive emotion, it's because I assign value to that thing, and when I have a negative emotion, it's because I don't assign value to that thing, right? And then gestures and body language as well, which can also be used as behavioral signals to help us with informatics. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at when we're trying to understand if someone's a good fit for the team. Not just do they have the skills and the experience, but how are they answering some of these questions? And how are they answering in a way which we believe is then transferable to the new team that we're looking to insert them into. Cool. Next one. So as a consequence of kind of processing those signals, it allows us to produce these cool things, these cool visualizations and reports on each of the candidates that we're looking at, which then helps recruiters to decide where to focus their time, right? Where to prioritize their time. I don't want to tell you that there's someone you should hire or shouldn't hire, but I do want to tell you that you should prioritize candidate 1 through 10 based on how well we think they fit with your skills requirements, experience requirements, cultural requirements, personality requirements, and competency requirements. I want you to prioritize. I want to help you prioritize. That's the role, right? That's the goal. That's what we're trying to be here for. Cool. I think that's probably it. Let's have a quick look at the next one. Yeah, cool. So in summary, if there are more better educated people than ever before, then what are we doing wrong, and why are we finding this recruitment problem so hard to solve? Number 2, measure things that are predictive, because not everything that you're measuring today is, and it might do you well to try and review that. Number 3, try and be objective, because objectivity will help you to reduce the impact of your bias on your decision making. And finally, think deeply about the problem that you're trying to solve. Thinking deeply about the problem will raise questions that need to be answered that you maybe haven't considered before. And that journey through the kind of internalization of language that you go through when you think deeply will help you to come up with other considerations that weren't immediately obvious. So cool, that's it from me today. Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to be back on LinkedIn live with all of you, and thank you all once again. If you've got any questions, drop me a note. If you feel like this is worth sharing, I'd really appreciate that. We want to get the message out to a bunch of people, and we can only do that with your support and with your help. So if you enjoyed the content, you felt like some of it might be useful for people, please, please, please do me a favor, share it with your friends, give us a like, give us a comment, and let's try and get the message out there that, look, there's another way to do recruitment. It's a little bit less gut-feely, it's a little bit more data-driven-y. So cool. Thank you very much.